The spring of 1875 arrived in London with an unusual warmth that seemed to promise transformation. For Lady Imogen Carlyle, however, transformation had always been something that happened to other young women. At 23, Imogen had long accepted her place in the complex hierarchy of London society. Eternally pleasant, perpetually overlooked, and far too sensible to harbour romantic illusions. Her father, the Earl of Carlisle, possessed an ancient title and modest fortune, enough to secure invitations to every notable event, but not quite enough to make his only daughter a matrimonial prize. Another season, another round of watching from the sidelines, Imogen murmured to herself, as her lady's maid Martha fastened the last button on her cream silk gown. The dress was beautiful. Her mother, the late Countess, had excellent taste, but beauty, Imogen had learned, only mattered when someone bothered to look. "Now, my lady, that's no way to speak," Martha chided gently, adjusting a wayward curl in Imogen's chestnut hair. "You're lovely as a spring morning, you are." Imogen offered a wan smile. Martha's loyalty was touching, if misguided. Pretty enough, perhaps, but not beautiful. Clever enough to converse, but not witty enough to sparkle. Well-bred enough to belong, but not remarkable enough to be remembered. The Ashworth ball that evening promised to be the usual affair. A crush of bodies in an overheated ballroom, young ladies displaying their accomplishments like exotic birds, and Imogen tucked away near the refreshment table, observing the theatre of courtship with anthropological detachment. She descended the grand staircase of Ashworth House with her father, who patted her hand absently. "Chin up, my dear. Perhaps this will be your season." It was the same thing he said every year, with decreasing conviction. The ballroom glittered with hundreds of candles, their light catching on jewels and polished floors. The air thrummed with music, laughter, and the underlying current of ambition that powered the marriage market. Imogen's practiced eye immediately catalogued the season's debutantes, all 17 and 18 years old, fresh-faced and hopeful, and the eligible gentlemen who circled them like well-dressed sharks. "Lady Imogen!" She turned to find Lady Beatrice Thornton, one of the few young women who still acknowledged her existence after multiple seasons. "Beatrice, how lovely you look." "As do you, though that colour does wash you out rather," Beatrice said with the casual cruelty of the truly beautiful. "Have you seen the Montclair brothers? Both in attendance tonight, quite unprecedented. The Duke rarely honours us with his presence." Imogen's pulse quickened involuntarily at the mention of Hugh Montclair, Duke of Blackthorn. She'd seen him precisely 3 times in as many years, a tall, severe figure who seemed to regard social gatherings with the enthusiasm one might reserve for a dental extraction. Handsome in a stark, uncompromising way, with dark hair, glacial grey eyes, and an air of barely restrained impatience with the frivolities of the ton. "I wasn't aware the Duke enjoyed such entertainments," Imogen managed. "Oh, he doesn't," Beatrice laughed. "But his brother Christopher does, and apparently the Duchess has put her foot down about family appearances. There, do you see?" Imogen followed Beatrice's gaze to the entrance, where 2 men stood in stark contrast to one another. The first, undoubtedly Hugh Montclair, surveyed the room with the expression of a man mentally cataloguing escape routes. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore his evening clothes with careless perfection, as though he'd been born in white tie rather than dressed in it. Beside him stood a younger man who could only be Christopher, Kit as she'd heard him called. Where Hugh was all sharp angles and restrained power, Kit radiated easy charm. Golden-haired where Hugh was dark, laughing where Hugh scowled, Kit embodied everything the ton loved in a gentleman, approachability wrapped in aristocratic breeding. "Christopher Montclair is quite the catch," Beatrice whispered conspiratorially. "Second son, of course, but the Duchess settled a substantial fortune on him, and he has no interest in politics or duty, only adventure and pleasure. Every mama with a practical daughter has him in her sights." Imogen watched as Kit's gaze swept the ballroom, pausing here and there with evident appreciation. Then impossibly his eyes found hers. She looked away immediately, heat rising in her cheeks, but when she dared glance back, he was still watching her. More than that, he was smiling at her. "Heavens," Beatrice breathed. "Is Christopher Montclair looking at you?" Before Imogen could formulate a response, Kit was moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been refused anything. Hugh remained by the entrance, his expression darkening almost imperceptibly as he watched his brother's progress. Lady Imogen Carlyle, isn't it? Kit's voice was warm, rich with genuine pleasure rather than mere politeness. Mr. Montclair. Imogen managed a curtsy, acutely aware that every eye in their vicinity had turned toward them. Beatrice had actually taken a step backward, as though to provide a better view of the spectacle. "I've been told you have the most interesting perspective on Turner's later works," Kit said, as though they were old friends picking up a familiar conversation. "I'm attempting to educate myself on modern art, and I fear I'm making rather a hash of it. Might you take pity on an ignorant soul and share your thoughts?" It was smoothly done, a request for her expertise rather than a conventional compliment. Imogen found herself responding before her usual caution could intervene. "I'm hardly an expert, Mr. Montclair, but I do find his use of light rather extraordinary. There's a luminosity in his work that seems to capture something beyond mere representation. You see, already I'm enlightened." Kit's smile was infectious. "Would you honor me with the next dance? I promise to interrogate you thoroughly about atmospheric perspective." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Kit Montclair, charming, wealthy, utterly inappropriate for a wallflower 23, was asking her to dance, in front of everyone. Yes, thank you." As Kit led her onto the floor for a waltz, Imogen caught a glimpse of Hugh Montclair. The Duke stood exactly where his brother had left him, but his posture had changed. Rigid, watchful. His grey eyes tracked their movement across the ballroom with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then Kit's hand settled at her waist, and she forced her attention back to her partner. "You must forgive my brother's brooding," Kit said lightly as they began to move. "Hugh has all the social graces of a wounded bear. Takes after our father that way, though at least father had the excuse of actually being interested in governance and estate management. Hugh simply dislikes people in general." "That seems rather harsh," Imogen heard herself say. "Perhaps he's simply selective about company." Kit laughed, a bright sound that drew smiles from nearby couples. "Defending him already? How charitable. Most people find Hugh terrifying, or at least profoundly off-putting. He cultivates the impression deliberately, I think. Why would he do that? To keep the world at arm's length, naturally. It's rather effective." Kit spun her expertly through a turn. "But we're not here to discuss my difficult brother. Tell me about yourself, Lady Imogen. How is it that we've attended the same events for years, yet I'm only now discovering what fascinating company you are?" The compliment was almost certainly practiced, yet Imogen found herself warming to it anyway. When had anyone last called her fascinating? When had anyone last noticed her at all? They talked through the waltz and into the next dance, which Kit claimed with easy presumption. He was, Imogen discovered, genuinely interested in art, music and literature, or at least skilled at appearing so. He spoke of his travels on the continent, his plans to visit Greece and Egypt, his passionate belief that life was meant to be experienced rather than merely endured. "You should see the world, Lady Imogen," he said earnestly. "England is magnificent, but there's so much beyond our shores. Light that transforms everything it touches, ruins that whisper of ancient glories, seas that seem to stretch into infinity." "It sounds wonderful," Imogen admitted. She'd rarely left London, her world confined to the familiar rhythms of the season and quiet summers at her father's estate in Kent. "Then perhaps someday I shall show it to you." The words hung between them, more promise than propriety should allow. Imogen's cheeks burned, but Kit merely smiled and guided her through another turn. She was so absorbed in the unexpected pleasure of being noticed, desired, sought after, that she didn't realize they'd danced past Hugh Montclair until she felt the weight of his gaze, like a physical touch. The Duke stood with his mother, the Duchess Georgiana, a formidable woman known throughout London for her sharp wit and sharper matchmaking instincts. But it was Hugh who commanded attention, even in stillness. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on Imogen with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Anger? Disapproval? Something else entirely? "Ah, there's Mother with Hugh," Kit said cheerfully. "Come, you must meet them properly." Before Imogen could protest, Kit was steering her toward the Montclairs with the confidence of a man who'd never considered the possibility of refusal. The Duchess greeted them with a knowing smile. "Christopher, darling, how energetic you've been this evening. You'll exhaust poor Lady Imogen with your enthusiasm. Mother, may I present Lady Imogen Carlyle? Lady Imogen, my mother, the Duchess of Blackthorn, and my brother Hugh." Imogen sank into a proper curtsy, suddenly conscious of her flushed cheeks and slightly disheveled hair. "Your Grace, Your Grace." "Rise, my dear," the Duchess said warmly. "Any young woman who can keep Christopher entertained for 2 consecutive dances deserves our admiration. He's usually flitting about like a butterfly, never settling long enough to hold a proper conversation." "Lady Imogen is different," Kit said, with such conviction that Imogen's heart performed an uncomfortable flutter. "She has substance." "How delightful," the Duchess murmured, her sharp gaze moving between Imogen and her younger son with evident calculation. Then she turned to Hugh. "Don't you agree, darling? That Lady Imogen seems a woman of substance?" Hugh Montclair finally spoke, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Imogen's chest. "I couldn't possibly comment, having never been introduced to Lady Imogen before this moment." The words were perfectly polite, yet somehow they felt like a challenge, or perhaps a reproach. "Then allow me to remedy that oversight," Kit said smoothly. "Hugh, Lady Imogen Carlisle, daughter of the Earl of Carlisle. Lady Imogen, my impossible brother, Hugh Montclair, Duke of Blackthorn and general impediment to human joy." "Christopher?" the Duchess sighed, though her lips twitched with suppressed amusement. Hugh's eyes met Imogen's for the first time directly, and she felt the impact like a door slamming shut. Grey and cold as winter sky, yet beneath that frost was something that burned, something that saw her, truly saw her, in a way that Kit's charming attention did not. "Lady Imogen," Hugh said quietly, inclining his head, "my brother speaks nonsense as easily as breathing. I hope you won't hold his proximity to me against him. That is," Imogen floundered, caught between Kit's warmth and Hugh's inexplicable intensity. "Don't terrorize her, Hugh," Kit laughed, apparently oblivious to the tension. "Lady Imogen, would you like some refreshment? I fear I've kept you dancing without regard for practical concerns." "Yes, thank you." As Kit offered his arm and led her away, Imogen glanced back once. Hugh was watching them go, his expression unreadable but his posture speaking volumes. The Duchess was watching her son with knowing eyes and an enigmatic smile. "There now," Kit said cheerfully as he procured her a glass of lemonade. "You've survived an encounter with Hugh. Most people find him rather overwhelming. He seems—" Imogen paused, searching for the right word. "Intense, angry, magnetic, reserved. That's one way of putting it." Kit's easy manner dimmed slightly. "Hugh takes everything seriously. Duty, honor, the weight of the dukedom. Sometimes I think he's forgotten how to simply live." There was genuine concern beneath Kit's levity, and Imogen felt her estimation of him rise. Whatever else he might be, Kit Montclair loved his brother. "Perhaps he needs reminding," she said softly. Kit's eyes brightened. "Perhaps he does, and perhaps you're exactly the person to do it." The evening continued in a pleasant blur. Kit claimed another dance, introduced her to several of his friends, and generally treated her as though she were the most captivating woman in the ballroom. Imogen knew it was likely performance rather than genuine interest. Kit Montclair could have his pick of beautiful, wealthy young women, but she allowed herself to enjoy the fantasy nonetheless. What she couldn't quite shake was the persistent sensation of being watched. Every time she glanced toward the edges of the ballroom, Hugh Montclair was there, sometimes conversing with other gentlemen, occasionally dancing with one of the season's diamonds, but always, somehow, aware of her location. Their eyes met across the crowded room more than once, and each time Imogen felt that same jolt of recognition, as though Hugh saw something in her that even she didn't fully understand. It was deeply unsettling, and entirely thrilling. As the evening drew to a close and her father appeared to collect her, Kit bowed over her hand with theatrical gallantry. "Lady Imogen, this has been the most unexpectedly delightful evening of my season. Might I call upon you tomorrow? I find myself desperately in need of further education regarding Turner's technique." Yes. Yes, you may call." Kit's smile was radiant. "Excellent. Until tomorrow, then." As Imogen descended the steps to her father's waiting carriage, she heard the Duchess's voice drift from the doorway above. "Well, Christopher, that was quite the display. Though I wonder if you've considered your brother's feelings in all this." "Hugh's feelings?" Kit's laugh was genuinely confused. "What has Hugh to do with anything? He barely acknowledges these events exist." The Duchess's response was too quiet to hear, but Imogen caught the thoughtful tone. In the carriage, her father patted her hand with more enthusiasm than usual. Well, now that was unexpected. Christopher Montclair showing such marked attention. The Duchess's younger son. Quite a catch, my dear. Quite a catch indeed. Imogen nodded absently, but her thoughts weren't on Kit's golden charm or easy affection. Instead, she found herself remembering the weight of Hugh Montclair's gaze, the quiet intensity of his voice, and the inexplicable feeling that something had shifted in the careful architecture of her unremarkable life. She had always been the overlooked one, the forgettable daughter of an earl with too little fortune and too little beauty to compete. But tonight, for the first time, two men had truly seen her. One had offered her his charm and attention. The other had offered nothing but a look that burned through every careful defense she'd constructed over 3 seasons of disappointment. As the carriage rattled through London's darkened streets, Imogen pressed her gloved hand to her chest, where her heart beat an unfamiliar, dangerous rhythm. The season, it seemed, had just become considerably more complicated. The following afternoon arrived with that peculiar quality of anticipation that transforms ordinary moments into potential turning points. Imogen sat in the drawing-room of Carlisle House, ostensibly reading a novel, but in reality watching the mantel clock with increasing anxiety. Kit Montclair had said he would call. Gentlemen said such things frequently and rarely meant them literally. Yet Imogen found herself hoping, dangerously, foolishly hoping, that he might be different. "My lady," Martha appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright with suppressed excitement. "Mr. Christopher Montclair has called. Your father said to show him up." Imogen's heart performed an acrobatic leap. "Thank you, Martha. Please, yes, show him in." She smoothed her morning dress, a soft lavender muslin that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and arranged herself with studied casualness on the settee. The novel remained open in her lap, though she couldn't have said what page she was on to save her life. Kit entered like springtime itself, his golden hair slightly wind-tousled, his smile immediate and genuine. But what made Imogen's breath catch was the enormous bouquet of white roses he carried, at least 3 dozen, their petals perfect and fragrant. "Lady Imogen," he said with a theatrical bow, "I come bearing tribute to beauty and hoping desperately for forgiveness." "Forgiveness," Imogen managed, half laughing despite her nervousness. "Whatever for? For monopolizing you so thoroughly last night that I prevented countless other gentlemen from discovering what delightful company you are. It was selfish of me, but I find I cannot regret it." He presented the roses with a flourish. "These seemed appropriate, white for truth and new beginnings. I hope you like roses." "They're beautiful," Imogen said, accepting the bouquet with hands that trembled slightly. No one had ever given her flowers before. "Thank you, Mr. Montclair, you're very kind. Kit, please, may I sit?" She nodded, and Kit settled into the chair opposite with easy grace. For a moment, silence stretched between them, but it was a comfortable silence filled with possibility rather than awkwardness. "I confess," Kit said eventually, "my excuse about Turner was partially fabricated. I do appreciate art, but mostly I wanted a reason to see you again without waiting for the next tedious ball." Honesty, Imogen thought, was perhaps Kit's most attractive quality. "I suspected as much. Gentlemen rarely seek art criticism at social events. True, we're usually too busy trying to avoid being trapped into unsuitable matches by ambitious mamas." Kit's expression turned more serious. "But you're different, Lady Imogen. Last night, speaking with you, it felt real. Not the usual performance we all conduct at these affairs." Imogen felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I felt that too." They talked for an hour, then 2. Kit described his travels through Italy, his plans to visit ancient ruins in Greece, his dream of sailing the Mediterranean. Imogen shared her love of literature, her passion for Turner's paintings, her quiet observations about London society. "You see everything," Kit said with evident admiration. "All the tiny dramas and unspoken rules that the rest of us follow without thinking. It's remarkable." "It's the privilege of being overlooked," Imogen admitted. "When no one pays you attention, you learn to pay attention to everything else." Kit reached across the space between them and gently took her hand. "Then everyone else has been profoundly foolish, but their loss is my gain." The touch sent electricity through Imogen's entire body. Kit's hand was warm, his grip gentle but confident. For a wild moment, She imagined what it might be like to be courted by this man, to be chosen, desired, swept into the adventurous life he described so vividly. A sharp knock at the door broke the moment. Martha entered, looking flustered. "My lady, the Duke of Blackthorn has called to see your father. The Earl is not at home, but his Grace asked if you might spare him a moment." Imogen's heart, which had been beating pleasantly fast, now threatened to escape her chest entirely. Hugh Montclair. Here now? Kit's expression flickered with something Imogen couldn't quite identify. Surprise, annoyance, concern. Then his easy smile returned. "Hugh? Here? How extraordinary. My brother never makes social calls. I wonder what brings him to Carlisle House." Before Imogen could respond, Hugh appeared in the doorway. He was dressed for riding, his dark coat fitted perfectly across his broad shoulders, his boots polished to mirror brightness. Where Kit radiated sunshine, Hugh embodied storm clouds. All contained power and barely restrained intensity. His grey eyes swept the room, taking in Kit's relaxed posture, the roses displayed prominently on the side table, Imogen's flushed cheeks. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Christopher," Hugh said quietly, "I wasn't aware you planned to call on Lady Imogen today." "Wasn't aware I needed your permission, brother dear," Kit replied lightly, though there was an edge beneath the levity. "Lady Imogen and I were having a lovely conversation about art and travel. Care to join us?" "Oh, wait, you find such topics frivolous." "I find pointless chatter frivolous," Hugh corrected, moving further into the room with the controlled grace of a predator. "Genuine discourse is something else entirely." Imogen found her voice. "Your Grace, this is an unexpected honor. I'm afraid my father is out, but perhaps I can help you with whatever brought you here." Hugh's eyes locked on hers, and once again Imogen felt that disorienting sensation of being truly seen. "I came to return a book your father lent mine several months ago, but since I'm here—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I wonder if you might give me your opinion on a matter, Lady Imogen." "My opinion?" The idea that the Duke of Blackthorn cared about her opinion on anything seemed absurd. "You strike me as someone who values honesty over flattery," Hugh said, still watching her with that unnervingly direct gaze. "My mother is attempting to renovate the gallery at Blackthorn Abbey. She's considering several artists for commissioned pieces, including Turner. I would welcome a knowledgeable perspective, one not influenced by commission fees or social obligation." It was smoothly done, a request for her expertise that rivaled Kit's own approach, yet somehow more weighted, more serious. "I'd be happy to offer what limited insight I have," Imogen said carefully, aware of Kit watching this exchange with increasing attention. "Excellent." Hugh moved to the window, examining the view of the small garden behind Carlisle House with apparent fascination. "Perhaps you might visit Blackthorn Abbey to see the existing collection. My mother would be delighted to receive you. We could arrange a tour, include proper chaperonage, make an afternoon of it." Kit stood abruptly. "What a marvelous idea! I'll escort Lady Imogen myself. I've been meaning to look at Father's old collection anyway, gathering dust in that enormous pile while Hugh broods in the library." "That won't be necessary," Hugh said, his voice acquiring a dangerous edge. "I'm perfectly capable of arranging appropriate hospitality." "Oh, I'm sure you are," Kit replied, his usually warm tone cooling noticeably. "But Lady Imogen might prefer company that doesn't include lectures on duty and propriety every 15 minutes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Imogen looked between the brothers, suddenly aware that this exchange had very little to do with art collections or afternoon visits. "Gentlemen," she said carefully, "I appreciate both your invitations. Perhaps we might arrange something when my father returns. He'd likely wish to accompany me on such a visit." "Of course," Hugh said stiffly, though his eyes never left his brother. "Forgive me for disrupting your visit, Lady Imogen. Christopher, a word in private?" "Actually, I'm rather comfortable here," Kit replied with deliberate ease. "It wasn't a request." The brothers stared at each other for a long moment, some silent battle of wills playing out in the charged air between them. Finally, Kit sighed and rose gracefully. "Very well. Lady Imogen, please forgive this interruption. I shall call again soon. Very soon." He bowed over her hand, his lips actually brushing her glove, in a gesture just barely within the bounds of propriety. "Until then, I remain your devoted admirer, As Kit moved toward the door, Hugh caught his arm. The corridor. Now. They disappeared into the hallway, and though they clearly attempted to keep their voices low, snatches of heated conversation drifted back to Imogen's ears. Sudden interest in Lady Imogen. Kit's voice, tight with barely suppressed anger. Reckless behavior. Hugh's rumble, equally controlled and equally furious. Always dictating. Kit again. Think before you. Hugh cutting his brother off. Then silence, followed by footsteps retreating toward the front entrance. Imogen sat frozen on the settee, her mind racing. What had just happened? Why were the Montclair brothers suddenly at odds over her, of all people? Martha reappeared, her eyes wide. Goodness, my lady, that was quite intense. Yes, Imogen murmured. Yes, it was. The whispers began almost immediately. At the Pemberton musical evening 2 days later, Imogen arrived to find herself the subject of considerable attention. Young ladies who'd never deigned to notice her suddenly appeared at her side with transparent curiosity. Older matrons watched her with calculating interest. Lady Imogen, Lady Thornton, Beatrice's mother, and one of society's most efficient gossips, appeared at her elbow. How delightful to see you. I understand you've been receiving calls from Mr. Christopher Montclair. Mr. Montclair has been kind enough to visit. Yes, Imogen said carefully. How lovely. And the Duke as well, I hear. Both Montclair brothers paying attention to the same young lady. How very unusual. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Imogen felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could formulate a response, Kit materialized at her side. Lady Thornton, he said with his most charming smile, how kind of you to keep Lady Imogen company until I could find her. Lady Imogen, would you honor me with your company during the performance? I believe they're playing Chopin. Your favorite, if I recall correctly. He'd remembered. From one conversation 3 days ago, Kit had remembered that she loved Chopin. As Kit guided her away from Lady Thornton's avid curiosity, Imogen caught sight of Hugh standing near the pianoforte. He was conversing with Lord Ashworth about something evidently serious, but his attention fractured the moment Kit's hand settled at Imogen's elbow. The entire evening proceeded in that strange, charged fashion. Kit was attentive without being overwhelming, securing seats for the performance, fetching refreshments, introducing her to his friends with evident pride. Several times Imogen caught other young ladies watching with barely concealed envy, emotions she'd witnessed countless times, but never as the object rather than the observer. Hugh maintained his distance, but Imogen felt his presence like a compass point. Every time she laughed at Kit's jokes, every time she smiled up at Kit's handsome face, she knew Hugh was watching, cataloguing, judging. It should have been uncomfortable. Instead, it was intoxicating. During the interval, Kit drew her aside to a relatively quiet corner. I must apologize for my brother's behavior the other day. Hugh can be difficult. He seemed concerned for you, Imogen said diplomatically. Concerned? That's a generous interpretation. Kit's usual levity dimmed. Hugh believes it's his duty to manage my life, to dictate my choices, to protect me from my own supposed recklessness. He doesn't understand that some of us want to live rather than merely exist. Perhaps he's afraid, Imogen suggested gently. Afraid of losing you. Kit looked at her with surprise, then something like wonder. You really do see everything, don't you? Yes, I think you're right. After Father died, Hugh became, well, he became what he thought a duke should be. Serious, remote, controlled. He locked away everything spontaneous or joyful about himself. That sounds lonely. It is, but it's his choice. Kit took her hand, his expression earnest. Lady Imogen, I realize we've known each other less than a week, but I find myself thinking about you constantly. Your intelligence, your warmth, your ability to see past superficial charm to the genuine person beneath. I want to continue this friendship, this connection, whatever it becomes. Imogen's heart hammered against her ribs. Was Kit Montclair actually courting her, genuinely, seriously courting her? I would like that too, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Kit lifted her gloved hand to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. Then let society whisper. Let them speculate. You and I know the truth, that sometimes the most extraordinary connections happen when we least expect them. From across the room, Imogen felt Hugh's gaze like a brand. When she dared glance his way, the Duke was watching them with an expression that made her breath catch. Not anger, precisely, not disapproval, though that was present too. Hunger, raw, undisguised hunger, and beneath that, something that looked almost like anguish. The situation escalated at the Duchess of Marlborough's ball a week later. By then, Kit's attentions had become so marked that society had begun coupling their names in gossip. Mr. Montclair and Lady Imogen had become a recognized phrase, uttered with varying degrees of approval and speculation. Imogen arrived in a gown of deep sapphire silk, a color that transformed her from merely pretty to genuinely striking. Kit found her immediately, his face lighting with open admiration. "Lady Imogen," he breathed, "you look absolutely magnificent." "Hardly that," she demurred, but pleasure warmed her voice. "I beg to differ." Kit offered his arm. "Shall we scandalize the ton by dancing every single dance together?" They didn't dance every dance, but they came perilously close, Kit claiming 3 waltzes, the maximum allowed without causing serious talk. Between dances they strolled the terrace, Kit describing his upcoming trip to Scotland for grouse season, and half-seriously inviting Imogen to convince her father to join the house party. "I want you to meet my friends," Kit said earnestly. "The people I truly care about beyond all this social performance. They'd love you, Imogen. May I call you Imogen?" The use of her Christian name should have scandalized her. Instead, it thrilled her. "Yes, and I shall call you Kit." His smile was radiant. "Kit and Imogen, I like the sound of that." They were standing at the edge of the terrace, the music and light from the ballroom spilling into the garden beyond, when Hugh Montclair appeared from the shadows like an avenging angel. "Imogen," Hugh said, his voice cutting through Kit's warm chatter like a blade through silk. "Might I have a word?" It was the first time he'd used her Christian name. On Kit's lips it had sounded affectionate, playful. On Hugh's it sounded possessive, claiming. Kit's hand tightened on Imogen's arm. "We were having a private conversation, Hugh. On a public terrace in full view of 200 guests. Hardly private." Hugh's eyes were storm grey in the dim light. "And I believe Lady Imogen promised me a dance." Imogen's mind raced. She had done no such thing. Hugh had barely spoken to her since their tense encounter at Carlisle House, but something in his expression, some desperate intensity, made her nod. Yes, I believe I did." Kit's jaw tightened. "Imogen, it's just one dance," she said softly, touching his arm in apology. "I'll find you directly after." Hugh offered his arm with silent command, and Imogen took it, aware of curious eyes tracking their movement back into the ballroom. The next dance was, inevitably, a waltz. As Hugh drew her into position, his hand at her waist, his touch burning through silk and propriety, Imogen realized she'd underestimated everything about this man. Where Kit held her with friendly confidence, Hugh held her as though she was something precious and dangerous all at once. His hand was large, strong, completely sure. His proximity overwhelmed her senses. Sandalwood and leather, starched linen and something uniquely him. They began to move, and Imogen discovered that Hugh Montclair danced with the same controlled intensity he brought to everything else. Perfect form, flawless timing, yet beneath the technical precision was something raw and barely leashed. "You've been spending considerable time with my brother," Hugh said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Kit has been kind enough to keep me company, yes." "Kind." Hugh's lips twisted on the word. "Is that what you call it?" Imogen felt a spark of defiance. "What would you call it, Your Grace?" "Reckless. Irresponsible. Typical Christopher. Pursuing what he wants without consideration for consequences." "Perhaps," Imogen said carefully, aware they were dancing past curious onlookers. "Kit simply knows what he wants and isn't afraid to pursue it. Some might call that courage rather than recklessness." Hugh's hand tightened at her waist. "You don't understand my brother as well as you think. And you don't understand him at all if you believe his interest in me is merely reckless impulse." They turned through a complex sequence, moving in perfect synchronization despite the tension crackling between them. Hugh guided her effortlessly, his body dictating their movement with absolute confidence. "Christopher collects experiences," Hugh said, each word precise and cutting. "Beautiful places, Interesting people, novel sensations. He's never committed to anything beyond his own pleasure. Not a career, not a purpose, certainly not a woman. The words stung, partially because they echoed Imogen's own half-formed concerns. Kit was charming, attentive, seemingly besotted. But was it real, or simply the thrill of conquest? "You're being cruel," she whispered. "I'm being honest. Something my brother apparently cannot manage." "And what about you, Your Grace?" Imogen looked up, meeting those grey eyes directly despite the way her heart threatened to hammer out of her chest. "What is your interest in this situation? You've barely acknowledged my existence until Kit began paying me attention. Why do you suddenly care what he does?" It was bold, possibly inappropriate, definitely dangerous. But Imogen had spent 3 seasons being overlooked, dismissed, relegated to the margins. She was tired of being careful. Hugh's expression shifted, something fierce and almost vulnerable, flickering across his features before he locked it down. "I care," he said slowly, "because my brother has no idea what he's doing, because he's playing with someone who deserves far better than to be another of Christopher's temporary fascinations." "How noble of you," Imogen said, anger giving her courage, "to protect poor foolish me from your brother's terrible attention. Tell me, Your Grace, have you considered that perhaps I'm capable of making my own decisions? That perhaps I enjoy Kit's company and want his attention? Do you?" The question was quiet, intense, loaded with implications Imogen couldn't quite pass. Hugh had pulled her incrementally closer during their exchange, until propriety's boundaries were tested, if not quite broken. She could feel the warmth of him, the solid strength of his body, the way his eyes searched hers with almost painful focus. Yes, I do." Something dark and painful crossed Hugh's face. "I see." The music swelled toward its conclusion, and Hugh guided her through the final turns with mechanical precision, all the fierce engagement draining from his manner. When the dance ended, he bowed with cold formality. "Thank you for the dance, Lady Imogen. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening with my brother." He released her and walked away, his broad shoulders rigid with tension. Imogen stood frozen on the dance floor, her emotions in chaos. What had just happened? Why did she feel as though she'd lost something precious she hadn't even known she possessed? Kit appeared at her side moments later, concern evident in his handsome face. "Are you all right? Hugh didn't upset you, did he?" "No, It was just a dance." But it hadn't been just a dance. It had been a confrontation, a challenge, a revelation. Hugh Montclair wasn't simply disapproving of his brother's courtship. He was jealous, furiously, desperately jealous. The realization should have pleased her. Instead, it terrified her. Because somewhere in the past few minutes, while dancing with the Duke of Blackthorn, Imogen Carlyle had discovered something she desperately wished to unlearn. Every time Kit Montclair made her heart flutter with pleasure, Hugh Montclair made it race with something far more dangerous: desire. The next 2 weeks transformed Imogen's quiet existence into something resembling a romantic comedy performed for all of London society. Everywhere she went, she found herself at the center of an unspoken battle between the Montclair brothers, a battle neither would acknowledge but that everyone could plainly see. Kit continued his attentive courtship with increased determination. He called at Carlisle House every other day, always bearing thoughtful gifts, books he thought she'd enjoy, sketches from his travels, once even a watercolor he'd attempted himself, badly but endearingly, of the view from Blackthorn Abbey's south terrace. They attended exhibitions together, chaperoned by Imogen's cousin Harriet, and Kit made her laugh with his irreverent observations about stuffy aristocrats and ridiculous social conventions. "You know what society needs?" Kit declared one afternoon as they strolled through the British Museum, ostensibly viewing the Elgin marbles, but mostly just enjoying each other's company. "A thorough revolution, not a violent one. I'm too fond of creature comforts for that, but something to shake up all these absurd rules about who can speak to whom and what constitutes proper behavior." "And who would lead this revolution?" Imogen asked, amused despite herself. "You and I, obviously. We'll start a salon like the French philosophes, but less tedious. Good conversation, genuine connection. No stupid rules about how many dances constitute an understanding or how long one must wait before using Christian names." Kit grinned at her. "We'll call it the Society for Sensible People. I'm not sure we'd have many members." "Good. We'll be exclusive. Membership by invitation only, granted solely to those with functioning brains and the courage to use them. It was this quality that Imogen found most appealing about Kit: his refusal to take anything too seriously, his determination to find joy even in circumstances designed to crush spontaneity. In his company, she felt lighter, freer, capable of being the person she'd always wanted to be rather than the one society expected. But if Kit represented liberation, Hugh embodied something far more complex. The Duke attended more social events in those 2 weeks than he had in the previous 2 years. He appeared at every ball, every musical evening, every garden party where Kit and Imogen might be found. He never approached directly, never engaged in obvious interference, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Imogen would be laughing at something Kit said, only to feel the weight of Hugh's gaze from across the room. She'd be dancing with Kit, aware of nothing but his charming conversation and easy grace, then suddenly lock eyes with Hugh and forget her next step entirely. Kit would be describing his travel plans, inviting her to imagine joining him on adventures across Europe, and Imogen would find herself watching Hugh's rigid shoulders, the tight set of his jaw, the way his hands clenched around his champagne glass. The worst, or perhaps best, Imogen couldn't decide, were the moments when Hugh actually did approach. Like at Lady Sefton's ball, when Kit had momentarily left to fetch refreshments, and Hugh materialized at Imogen's side, as though summoned by dark magic. "You look well this evening, Lady Imogen," Hugh said quietly, his eyes cataloguing every detail of her appearance with disconcerting thoroughness. "Thank you, Your Grace, as do you." It was true. Hugh wore evening clothes with the same careless perfection he brought to everything, looking simultaneously civilized and dangerously untamed. An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Hugh spoke again. "My mother wishes to extend a formal invitation for you and your father to dine at Blackthorn House next week. She's quite taken with you." "That's very kind." "It has nothing to do with kindness." Hugh's voice dropped, acquiring an edge that made Imogen's pulse spike. "My mother believes you'd be good for Christopher. She thinks you might give him purpose, direction, help him become the man he should be." "And what do you think?" Hugh's grey eyes bored into hers. "I think Christopher doesn't deserve you. I think he'll charm you and fascinate you and make you believe in possibilities, then disappear to Greece or Egypt or wherever his restless spirit takes him next, leaving you to pick up the pieces of your ruined reputation and broken heart." The words were harsh, but beneath them, Imogen heard something else: fear. Hugh wasn't just worried about his brother's recklessness. He was terrified of it. "Kit wouldn't do that," Imogen said with more conviction than she entirely felt. "Wouldn't he?" Hugh stepped closer, close enough that Imogen could smell his sandalwood cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. "Christopher has never committed to anything difficult in his entire life. The moment the novelty wears off, the moment actual sacrifice is required, he'll run. It's what he always does." "You're wrong about him." "Cass, am I?" Hugh's hand came up, fingers almost but not quite touching her cheek. The non-contact was somehow more intimate than an actual touch would have been. "Then prove it, Lady Imogen. Choose him. Accept his courtship. Ignore my warnings, and see what happens when the adventure loses its shine." Imogen couldn't breathe. They were standing too close, the air between them charged with electricity and danger, and something that felt terrifyingly like destiny. "Why do you care so much?" she whispered. "If you think Kit is wrong for me, if you believe I'm making a terrible mistake, why not simply let me fail?" Hugh's jaw clenched. For a moment, Imogen thought he might actually answer honestly, might explain the intensity in his eyes, the barely leashed hunger in the way he watched her, the reason he seemed to appear wherever she went. Instead, he stepped back sharply, breaking whatever spell had woven itself between them. "Because despite what my brother believes, I don't enjoy watching people suffer needlessly. Consider yourself warned, Lady Imogen." He walked away, leaving Imogen trembling and confused, and desperately wishing Kit would hurry back with those refreshments so she could force her heart rate back to something approaching normal. The situation reached its crisis point at the Duchess Georgiana's own summer garden party at Blackthorn House, an event that had become legendary in London society, both for its lavishness and for the Duchess's uncanny ability to facilitate matches among her guests. The grounds of Blackthorn House were magnificent, Acres of manicured gardens, ancient oak trees, a small lake with swans gliding serenely across its surface. The weather cooperated beautifully, providing bright sunshine tempered by a gentle breeze that made the heat bearable. Imogen arrived with her father, both of them slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur. They'd been to fine houses before. The Earl of Carlisle's connections ensured invitations to notable events, but Blackthorn House operated on a different scale entirely. This was ducal wealth, married to centuries of aristocratic power, and it showed in every perfect hedge, every marble statue, every footman stationed at precise intervals along the winding paths. Kit found her immediately, appearing as though he'd been watching for her arrival. "Imogen, you look like springtime personified. Come, let me show you the gardens properly. Mother's done extraordinary work with the roses this year." He offered his arm, and Imogen took it gratefully, trying to ignore the way her father's face lit with obvious hope. The Earl had become increasingly enthusiastic about Kit's courtship, seeing in it possibilities he'd long since abandoned for his spinster daughter. They strolled through beds of roses, past fountains where children shrieked with laughter, carefully supervised by nannies, through a hedge maze that Kit navigated with practiced ease. He was charming as always, but something in his manner seemed different today, more serious, more intent. "Imogen," Kit said eventually, guiding her to a secluded bench overlooking the lake. "We need to talk." Her heart lurched. Those 4 words rarely preceded anything good. "I've been thinking," Kit continued, taking her hand between both of his, "about us, about what's been happening these past weeks. I know society is talking, speculating about my intentions. Your father is clearly hopeful. And I care for you, Imogen, genuinely. You're wonderful company, you make me laugh, you see the world in ways that constantly surprise me." "But," Imogen supplied, because surely there was a but coming. Kit's expression turned rueful. "But I'm not entirely sure I'm ready for what comes next. Marriage, settling down, taking on all the responsibilities everyone expects. I'm only 6 and 20. There's so much I still want to do, places I want to see. I leave for Scotland in 3 days, then potentially onto the continent after that. Greece, definitely, maybe Egypt." Imogen felt something sink in her chest. Hugh had been right. Of course Hugh had been right. "I see," she managed, proud that her voice remained steady. "No, wait, I'm explaining this badly." Kit squeezed her hands urgently. "I'm not saying I don't want a future with you. I'm saying I need time. I need to be certain, to be absolutely sure that I'm ready to give you what you deserve. It wouldn't be fair to rush into promises I might not be prepared to keep." It was, Imogen had to admit, refreshingly honest. Kit wasn't abandoning her, but neither was he committing. He was doing exactly what Hugh had predicted, preserving his freedom while keeping his options open. "I understand," Imogen said quietly. And she did. Kit was being more decent than most men in his position would be, more careful of her feelings than she had any right to expect. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. "Do you hate me?" Kit asked, his blue eyes anxious. "No. No, of course not. You're being honest, which is more than I could hope for." Kit lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it with genuine affection. "You're extraordinary, do you know that? Any other woman would be throwing things at me right now. But you understand." Imogen smiled, though it felt fragile. "I'm very understanding. It's one of my chief qualities as a wallflower." "You are not a wallflower," Kit said fiercely. "You're brilliant and beautiful, and any man would be lucky to have you, including me, especially me. I just need time." "Time," Imogen repeated. The word felt heavy, loaded with all the things Kit wasn't quite saying. Time to adventure, time to be free, time to be absolutely certain before committing to anything as permanent as marriage. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the garden party drifting over the hedge, laughter, music, the clink of crystal. Imogen's mind raced. She cared for Kit, truly cared for him. His friendship had given her something precious, the experience of being chosen, noticed, desired. For the first time in her life, she'd felt like she mattered. But was that enough? Was gratitude a foundation for love? "We should rejoin the party," Imogen said eventually. "People will talk if we're gone too long." Kit nodded, helping her rise. But before they could start back toward the main lawn, a familiar voice cut through the pleasant afternoon. "There you are, Christopher. Mother's been looking for you." Hugh Montclair stood at the entrance to their secluded area, his tall frame blocking the path back to the party. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes blazed with barely suppressed emotion as they moved between his brother and Imogen. "Hugh," Kit said with forced cheerfulness, "we were just— I can see what you were doing." Hugh's voice was controlled, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. "Lady Imogen, might I escort you back to the main lawn? I believe your father was asking after you." It wasn't a request. Kit's hand tightened on Imogen's arm. "Actually, I was about to— Christopher." Hugh's tone acquired a sharp edge. A word privately. The brothers stared at each other, tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Finally, Kit sighed and released Imogen's arm. "Very well. Imogen, I'll find you shortly." As Kit moved toward his brother, Hugh caught his arm and pulled him several steps away, their voices dropping to urgent whispers. Imogen could only catch fragments. "Cannot keep doing this." Hugh angry but trying to maintain control. "None of your concern," eating Kit, defensive. "Leading her on." Hugh again, louder. "Hypocrite." Kit, his usual good humor completely absent. Then Kit jerked his arm free and stalked past his brother, past Imogen, back toward the main party without another word. His shoulders were rigid, his pleasant expression replaced by frustrated anger. Hugh watched him go, then turned to Imogen. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the afternoon sunshine filtering through oak leaves, the distant sounds of the party providing incongruous accompaniment to the tension between them. "You heard that," Hugh said finally. "Not a question." "Some of it." "Good. Then I don't need to pretend." Hugh moved closer, his grey eyes intense. "What did Christopher say to you? What promises did he make?" Imogen lifted her chin. "That's between Kit and myself, Your Grace." "Hugh. My name is Hugh." He said it with quiet intensity, as though the permission to use his Christian name mattered desperately. "And I apologize, but I cannot be diplomatic about this any longer. Christopher is going to break your heart, Imogen. He's already preparing his exit. Scotland, then Greece, then wherever his restlessness takes him next. He'll write charming letters for a few months, then the correspondence will slow, then stop entirely. You'll hear he's met some exotic woman in Athens or Rome, and that will be the end of it." "You don't know that," Imogen protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know my brother. I've watched him do this same thing a dozen times with pursuits that bored him, commitments that required sacrifice, responsibilities he decided were too burdensome." Hugh's hand came up, cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness. "You deserve better than to be another of Christopher's abandoned enthusiasms." The touch sent electricity through Imogen's entire body. Hugh's palm was warm, slightly calloused, achingly careful. She should step back, should maintain proper distance, but she found herself frozen, caught in the intensity of his gaze. "And what would better look like?" she whispered. Hugh's thumb traced along her cheekbone, the caress so light it might have been imagined. "Someone who knows your worth. Someone who wouldn't need time to decide whether you're worth committing to. Someone who would fight for you, challenge you, refuse to let you settle for anything less than you deserve. Someone like you." The words were out before Imogen could stop them. Hugh's expression turned fierce, almost pained. "Wrong brother, my dear," he said quietly, echoing the words from weeks ago but transforming them into something new, something raw and honest and desperately vulnerable. "You've been flirting with the wrong brother all along." Imogen's breath caught. "Hugh, I've watched you laugh with Christopher, dance with him, glow under his attention, and every moment has been torture because I know that he'll eventually disappoint you, not through malice, but through thoughtlessness, through his eternal need for freedom and adventure over genuine connection." Hugh's other hand came up to frame her face, his touch reverent and desperate all at once. "But I wouldn't disappoint you, Imogen. I wouldn't need time to be certain. I wouldn't wonder if you were worth the sacrifice of my precious freedom, because you're not a sacrifice, you're everything." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Imogen's carefully constructed understanding of the past weeks shattered and reformed into a new pattern. Hugh's constant presence at social events, his barely restrained anger when watching her with Kit, the way he looked at her as though she were simultaneously the answer to every question and the source of infinite torment. "You can't mean that," she breathed. "You barely know me." I know enough. I know you see what others miss. I know you're kind without being weak, intelligent without being cruel about it. I know you appreciate art and literature and complex ideas. I know you make my brother laugh, which is no small feat." Hugh's voice dropped. "And I know that when you walked into that ballroom weeks ago in that cream silk gown, something in me recognized something in you. Chemistry, fate, madness, call it what you will. But I've been fighting it ever since, trying to do the honorable thing and not interfere with Christopher's pursuit." "Then why are you interfering now?" "Because I've run out of honor." Hugh's laugh was bitter, self-deprecating. "Because watching you choose him is killing me. Because I'm selfish enough to want you to know the truth before you make a decision that will affect the rest of your life." Imogen's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. The Duke of Blackthorn, serious, reserved, impossible Hugh Montclair, was declaring himself to her, here in his mother's garden, while his brother was somewhere nearby, nursing his pride and hurt feelings. It was inappropriate, impulsive, everything Hugh supposedly despised. It was also the most romantic thing that had ever happened to her. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll consider it. Consider me." Hugh's hands slid from her face to her shoulders, his touch burning through the fabric of her afternoon dress. "I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. I'm just asking you to acknowledge that there's a choice to make, that it's not just Christopher, that maybe you've been looking at the wrong brother all along." Before Imogen could respond, voices drifted from nearby. Other guests, wandering the gardens. Hugh stepped back immediately, restoring proper distance, his expression shuttering into its usual guarded neutrality, but his eyes remained intense, desperate, hopeful. "Think about it," he said quietly. "Please." Then he was gone, striding back toward the main party with controlled urgency, leaving Imogen standing alone beside the lake, with her entire world turned upside down. The weeks following the garden party were perhaps the most confusing of Imogen's life. Kit departed for Scotland as planned, leaving behind a steady stream of charming letters describing the countryside, the hunting, the friends who'd accompanied him. His correspondence was warm, affectionate, full of promises to see her upon his return. But nowhere in those carefully written pages did Kit mention the future, marriage, or any concrete plans beyond vague references to "when we're together again." Hugh, meanwhile, had withdrawn into careful propriety. He continued attending social events, but maintained scrupulous distance, never approaching Imogen directly, never dancing with her again, never giving society ammunition for gossip. But she felt his presence constantly, his eyes following her across ballrooms, his attention focused on her even when he appeared to be conversing with others. It was maddening and revealing, because in Kit's physical absence and epistolary presence, Imogen discovered something uncomfortable. She missed Hugh more. She missed the intensity of his attention, the challenge in his gaze, the way he saw past her careful pleasantness to the complex, uncertain woman beneath. Kit made her feel charming and desirable. Hugh made her feel seen. The realization came fully formed one evening at the theatre, where Imogen attended a performance of Romeo and Juliet with her father and cousin Harriet. Hugh was present, seated in the blackthorn box across the theatre with his mother, and throughout the entire first act, Imogen found her attention split between the stage and the Duke's profile. Hugh watched the play with complete focus, his expression intent as the young lovers declared their passion. When Romeo spoke of love at first sight, of knowing instantly that Juliet was his destiny, Hugh's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And when Juliet questioned whether Romeo's love was too sudden, too passionate to be real, Hugh's eyes flicked across the theatre to meet Imogen's. The moment lasted perhaps 2 heartbeats, but Imogen felt its impact like a physical blow. In Hugh's gaze, she saw everything he'd said in the garden: hunger, hope, fear, determination. The question that had been building in her mind for weeks finally crystallized into certainty. She'd been courted by the wrong brother all along. Kit was wonderful, charming, kind, endlessly entertaining, but what she felt for him was gratitude and affection, not the bone-deep recognition that Hugh had described. Kit made her happy. Hugh made her feel alive. The question was what to do about it. The opportunity came in an unexpected form. A letter from the Duchess Georgiana inviting Imogen and her father to dinner at Blackthorn House. A small gathering, the Duchess wrote in her elegant script, just family and a few close friends. Kit would be returning from Scotland that week, and the Duchess wished to celebrate his homecoming. Imogen's father accepted immediately, obvious hope written across his features. The Earl still harboured expectations about Kit's courtship, still believed that connection might elevate his daughter's prospects. Imogen didn't have the heart to disabuse him. The evening of the dinner arrived with that peculiar mix of anticipation and dread that accompanies moments of potential transformation. Imogen dressed with unusual care, selecting a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes and the richness of her chestnut hair. She wasn't entirely sure what she planned to do, only that something needed to happen. The current situation, suspended between Kit's vague promises and Hugh's silent intensity, couldn't continue indefinitely. Blackthorn House at night was even more magnificent than by day. Candlelight gleamed off marble floors and ancient portraits, casting everything in warm golden light. The Duchess greeted them in the drawing room with her characteristic grace, her sharp eyes taking in Imogen's appearance with evident approval. "Lady Imogen, how lovely you look. That colour suits you beautifully. And Lord Carlisle, so good of you to join us. Christopher should be down shortly. He only just arrived this afternoon and is no doubt making himself presentable after days of tramping about the Scottish wilderness." Hugh stood by the fireplace, magnificent in evening clothes that emphasized his broad shoulders and long legs. His eyes found Imogen immediately, tracking over her appearance with barely concealed hunger before his expression shuttered into politeness. "Lady Imogen, Lord Carlisle, welcome." "Your Grace," Imogen managed, proud that her voice remained steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. Before conversation could develop, Kit burst into the room with his usual energy. He was tanned from days outdoors, his golden hair slightly longer than fashion dictated, his smile immediate and genuine. "Imogen, father, marvellous to see you both." Kit crossed directly to Imogen, catching her hands in his and squeezing warmly. "You look absolutely stunning. I've missed you terribly. Scotland was magnificent but terribly dull without proper conversation." From his position by the fireplace, Hugh's expression turned to stone. The dinner itself was a study in carefully maintained civility, masking roiling emotional undercurrents. The Duchess had assembled a small group, Imogen and her father, the Montclair brothers, and Lord and Lady Ashworth, old family friends. Conversation flowed easily enough, touching on politics, literature, Kit's adventures in Scotland. But beneath the pleasant surface, Imogen felt the tension between the brothers like a living thing. Kit was determinedly cheerful, monopolizing Imogen's attention with stories and jokes and flattering observations. Hugh remained mostly silent, his responses to direct questions brief and carefully neutral, his attention seemingly focused on his wine glass. Only Imogen, seated between the brothers, could feel the true temperature of the situation. Kit's hand brushed hers frequently, casual touches that seemed designed to stake a claim. Hugh sat rigid in his chair, radiating controlled fury, his knuckles white around his silverware. Whenever Kit leaned particularly close to whisper something amusing in Imogen's ear, the Duchess watched it all with knowing eyes and an enigmatic smile, occasionally catching Imogen's gaze with an expression that seemed to say, "Well, my dear, what will you do about this?" After dinner, the party adjourned to the music room, where Lady Ashworth had agreed to play. The room was beautiful, walls lined with instruments, a pianoforte positioned to catch the candlelight, comfortable seating arranged in an intimate semicircle. Kit immediately claimed the seat beside Imogen, while Hugh positioned himself across the room, his posture suggesting he'd rather be literally anywhere else. As Lady Ashworth began playing Beethoven, something melancholic and beautiful, Kit leaned close to Imogen. "Walk with me in the conservatory after this. I want to talk to you properly without everyone watching." Imogen nodded, her stomach tight with anticipation and anxiety. This was it then. Kit was going to clarify his intentions, make some declaration or confession that would force her to respond honestly. From across the room, Hugh's eyes bored into her, his expression unreadable, but his intensity unmistakable. The music continued for another quarter-hour. Then the party began to disperse. Lord and Lady Ashworth making their farewells, the Duchess retiring early with complaints about a headache that looked suspiciously fabricated. Imogen's father drawn into conversation with the butler about some rare brandy in the cellars. Kit offered Imogen his arm. "Shall we?" The conservatory at Blackthorn House was a marvel of glass and greenery, filled with exotic plants collected from around the world. At night, lit by carefully placed lanterns, it felt like stepping into an enchanted jungle. Kit guided Imogen to a bench surrounded by night-blooming jasmine, its scent heavy and sweet in the warm air. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sounds the distant music from the house and the gentle rustling of leaves. "Imogen," Kit began, his usual brightness dimmed to something more serious, "I need to be honest with you. Please do." Kit took her hand, studying it as though memorizing every detail. "These past weeks in Scotland gave me time to think about my life, my plans, what I want for my future, and I realized something important." Imogen's heart sank. She knew what was coming, could read it in Kit's earnest expression, hear it in his careful tone. "I care for you tremendously," Kit continued. "You're wonderful in every way, but I'm not ready for what you deserve. Not ready for marriage, for settling down, for all the responsibilities that come with building a life with someone. I'm 26 years old, and I still feel like there's so much I need to do, need to see, need to experience before I can commit to that kind of future." "I understand," Imogen said quietly. And she had understood really since their conversation at the garden party. Kit was kind enough to want to spare her feelings, honest enough not to lead her on, but ultimately unable to offer what she needed. "I knew you would understand. You always do." Kit squeezed her hand gently. "I want you to know that my affection for you is genuine. You've brought such light into my life these past weeks, but it wouldn't be fair to ask you to wait while I figure myself out. You deserve someone who's certain, who's ready, who can give you everything right now rather than someday, maybe. Someone like your brother." The words were out before Imogen could stop them. Kit's expression flickered with surprise, then something like resignation, then, unexpectedly, relief. "You've noticed, then, the way Hugh looks at you, the way he can barely stand to be in the same room when we're together." Kit laughed softly. "I've been watching it happen for weeks, watching my brother fall for the woman I was courting. It should have made me furious, but it didn't. No, because I'm not blind, Imogen. I've seen the way you look at him too, when you think no one's watching, when he says something that cuts through all the pleasant conversation to something real. You light up for him in a way you never quite do for me." Kit's smile was tinged with melancholy, but genuine nonetheless. "And as much as my ego would prefer otherwise, I love my brother. I want him to be happy, and I think you might be the person who could make that possible." Tears pricked Imogen's eyes. "Kit, I'm so sorry. I never meant—" "Don't apologize, please." Kit lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it with affectionate finality. "You've done nothing wrong. Chemistry isn't something we control. And honestly, if I were ready for everything you deserve, I'd fight for you. But I'm not ready, and Hugh is. He's been ready since the moment he saw you. He just wouldn't admit it because he thought I was serious about courting you. You're an extraordinary man, Christopher Montclair." "I know," Kit said with a flash of his usual humor. "I'm also remarkably perceptive when I bother to pay attention. Now go. Hugh's probably in the library, brooding and pretending to read something improving. Put him out of his misery, will you?" Imogen stood, but Kit caught her hand once more. "For what it's worth, I think you two will be magnificent together. Just be patient with him. Hugh's spent so long being the responsible one, the serious one, the duke who never allows himself anything frivolous, that he's forgotten how to simply want something for himself. Remind him." The library at Blackthorn House was exactly what one might expect from a ducal residence. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes, rolling ladders for accessing higher shelves, comfortable chairs positioned near the massive fireplace. And there, exactly as Kit had predicted, sat Hugh Montclair. He wasn't actually reading. The book lay open in his lap, but his eyes were fixed on the fire, his expression distant and bleak. He looked, Imogen thought, like a man who'd resigned himself to unhappiness. "Your Grace?" Hugh's head snapped up, his grey eyes widening as he saw her standing in the doorway. He rose immediately, the book tumbling forgotten to the floor. "Lady Imogen, What are you doing here? Where's Christopher?" "Kit is in the conservatory, being remarkably gracious about releasing me from a courtship neither of us were quite convinced by." Imogen stepped into the library, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. It was improper. shockingly so, but she found she didn't care. He suggested I might find you here, brooding. I don't brood, Hugh said automatically, then caught himself. That is, I was simply thinking. About? Hugh's jaw tightened. About how I've been a complete fool. About how I waited too long, stayed too silent, convinced myself that honor meant allowing my brother his pursuit, even as it destroyed me to watch. About how I'm about to lose something I never even had the courage to fight for. Imogen moved closer, closing the distance between them with careful steps. You haven't lost anything. Not yet. Hugh went very still, his entire body tense with barely restrained hope. What are you saying? I'm saying you were right that first time you pulled me aside at a ball. Wrong brother, you said. It took me weeks to understand, but you were right. Imogen's hands trembled slightly as she reached out, placing her palms flat against Hugh's chest. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her fingers, racing as fast as her own. I was flirting with the wrong brother all along, because Kit is wonderful, charming, everything a woman should want. But he's not what I want. He's not who makes me feel truly alive. Imogen, Hugh's voice was rough, barely controlled. You see me, Hugh. Not the pleasant wallflower everyone expects, not the grateful daughter of an earl with modest fortune. You see all the complicated, uncertain, occasionally sharp-tongued reality beneath the polite exterior. And that terrifies me, because it means I can't hide from you. But it makes me feel more myself than I've ever felt with anyone. Hugh's hands came up to cover hers, pressing them more firmly against his chest. I've been watching you for weeks fighting this, trying to be honorable while wanting nothing more than to drag you away from Christopher's charming attentions and declare myself like some gothic hero. It's been torture. Then stop being tortured. Imogen looked up into those grey eyes that had haunted her dreams, saw everything she needed reflected there. Desire, determination, hope, fear, absolute certainty. Stop being honorable and serious and responsible. Just for a moment, allow yourself to want something. Want me. Hugh's control shattered. His hands slid from hers to her waist, pulling her flush against him with barely restrained urgency. I want you, he said roughly, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. I've wanted you since that first night at the Ashworth ball, when you stood talking to Beatrice Thornton and laughing at something she said. You weren't performing for anyone, weren't trying to catch attention. You were just yourself. And I looked at you and thought, there she is. The one person who could make me want to be less alone. Imogen's breath caught. Hugh, let me finish. Please. Hugh's hands tightened at her waist, his voice dropping to something raw and vulnerable. I'm not easy to be with. I'm serious. Often too serious. I take my responsibilities too heavily. I brood, yes, I brood. And I'm not particularly skilled at frivolous conversation or charming gestures. But I would be devoted to you, Imogen. Absolutely devoted. You wouldn't be another of my responsibilities to manage. You'd be the reason I manage everything else, so I could come home to you at the end of each day and remember why any of it matters. Tears spilled over Imogen's cheeks. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. It's simply the truth. Hugh's thumb came up to brush away her tears with infinite gentleness. Say you'll consider it. Consider me. Consider a future where you don't have to settle for charming adventures, where you can have passion and intensity and someone who sees you exactly as you are and wants nothing more than to build a life worthy of you. I don't need to consider, Imogen said, her hands sliding up to frame Hugh's face, feeling the slight roughness of his jaw beneath her palms. I already know my answer. It's yes. To you, to us, to whatever this becomes. Yes. Hugh made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, then lowered his head and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste, polite kiss Imogen might have imagined from the proper Duke of Blackthorn. It was intense, desperate, full of weeks of suppressed longing and carefully controlled desire finally unleashed. Hugh kissed her as though she were air and he'd been drowning, as though she were a question and he was answering with his entire being. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hugh rested his forehead against hers. We're going to cause the most magnificent scandal. Are we? Imogen asked, dizzy with joy and desire, and the impossible reality of being held by Hugh Montclair. Undoubtedly. Christopher courting you, then me stealing you from my own brother. Society will feast on it for months. Hugh's smile was wicked, transforming his usually serious face into something almost boyish. I find I don't care even slightly. Neither do I. Good, because I intend to court you properly now, with absolute shamelessness and zero regard for what anyone thinks. You'll be so thoroughly compromised by my attentions that you'll have no choice but to marry me to preserve your reputation. Imogen laughed, the sound bright and free. Is that a proposal, Your Grace? Not yet. When I propose, it will be properly done, on my knees with a ring with pretty words about forever. Hugh's expression turned serious, though his eyes still sparkled with that newfound lightness. But it is a promise, that I'm yours if you'll have me, that I'll fight for this, for us, with everything I have. I'll have you, Imogen whispered. I choose you, Hugh Montclair. Every time, I choose you. They kissed again, slower this time but no less intense. Through the library windows the moon rose over Blackthorn House's grounds, and somewhere in the distance Imogen thought she heard laughter, Kit's laughter, bright and pleased, as though her choice had somehow freed him as well. The door opened suddenly, and the Duchess Georgiana stood silhouetted in the doorway. She took in the scene before her eldest son holding Lady Imogen Carlyle, both flushed and dishevelled, clearly having just been caught in a passionate embrace, and smiled with absolute satisfaction. "Well," the Duchess said calmly, "I suppose that settles things nicely. Christopher seemed to think you two would work it out. Shall I inform Lord Carlisle that he'll need to prepare for a wedding, or would you prefer to maintain suspense a bit longer?" Hugh groaned, but didn't release Imogen. "Mother, your timing is as impeccable as ever. I raised you boys to be decisive, darling. Clearly Hugh has finally learned the lesson." The Duchess's smile widened. "I must say, I did wonder how long it would take you to stop being honourable and simply claim what you wanted. Lady Imogen, you've worked a miracle. I haven't seen Hugh look this alive in years." Imogen felt herself blushing furiously. "Your Grace, Oh, don't apologise, dear girl. I've been hoping for exactly this outcome since the moment Christopher showed interest. I knew my serious son needed someone with substance, someone who could see past his forbidding exterior to the passionate heart beneath." The Duchess moved into the library, entirely unruffled by having discovered them in such a compromising position. "Now then, shall we discuss settlements and wedding dates, or would you prefer to maintain the fiction that nothing momentous just occurred?" Hugh looked at Imogen, his expression caught between exasperation and amusement. "What do you say, my love? Shall we tell them or attempt to preserve propriety a bit longer?" "Tell them," Imogen said firmly. "I'm tired of propriety, and besides, I believe you promised me shameless courtship and absolute scandal." "That I did." Hugh turned to his mother, his arm still firmly around Imogen's waist. "Mother, you may inform Lord Carlisle that I intend to court his daughter with every intention of making her my Duchess. The scandal will be unavoidable, Christopher's unofficial courtship, followed immediately by my pursuit of the same woman. Society will have a spectacular time discussing our family's romantic chaos." "Wonderful!" The Duchess clapped her hands together with genuine delight. "Finally, something interesting to discuss besides politics and the weather. I shall help spread the gossip myself, carefully, of course, to ensure it reflects well on Lady Imogen. By next week, everyone in London will know that both Montclair brothers pursued her, and she chose the Duke. Your reputation will be quite secure, my dear." Imogen found herself laughing at the absurdity of it all. Hours ago she'd been suspended in uncertainty, unsure whether she'd end up with Kit's charming adventure or Hugh's intense devotion, or neither. Now she stood in the Duke of Blackthorn's arms, being welcomed into his family by a mother who seemed to regard the entire situation as a successful military campaign. "I think," Imogen said, "that this has been the strangest and most wonderful evening of my entire life." "Good," Hugh murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because I intend to give you many more. A lifetime of them, if you'll allow it." From the doorway, Kit's voice rang out. "Are we celebrating?" I heard Mother's delighted scheming voice and assumed victory had been achieved. Kit appeared beside his mother, his expression genuinely pleased as he took in Hugh and Imogen's obvious happiness. "Well done, brother. I knew you had it in you to stop brooding and actually claim what you wanted." "Christopher," Hugh said quietly, releasing Imogen just enough to face his brother. Don't." Kit held up a hand, his smile warm and sincere. "Don't apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. I pursued Imogen because she was fascinating, but I was never prepared to give her what she needed. You are. You have been from the start. I'm glad you finally admitted it." Hugh crossed to his brother, pulling him into a brief, fierce embrace. "You're entirely too understanding about this." "I know, it's one of my better qualities." Kit clapped Hugh on the shoulder, then turned to Imogen with a theatrical bow. "My lady, may I say that you have excellent taste? My brother is terribly serious and prone to lecturing, but his heart is quite the finest thing about him. Take good care of it, won't you?" "I will," Imogen promised, her own eyes bright with tears. "And Kit, thank you for everything. Think nothing of it. Besides, this means I'm free to pursue my travels without feeling guilty about abandoning anyone. Greece awaits, and perhaps Egypt after that. I shall send you both ridiculously detailed letters about ancient ruins and exotic markets." Kit's expression turned more serious. "Be happy, both of you. You deserve it." 2 years later. The gardens at Blackthorn Abbey were in full bloom, roses and lavender perfuming the warm June air. Inside the Abbey's drawing room, Imogen Montclair, Duchess of Blackthorn, sat at her writing desk, composing a letter to her dearest friend, Beatrice. 2 years of marriage had transformed her in ways she'd never anticipated. The wallflower who'd once resigned herself to permanent obscurity now managed one of England's grandest estates, hosted political dinners where she sparred verbally with ministers and diplomats, and had become known throughout London society for her sharp wit and her influence over the previously unapproachable Duke. But the greatest transformation was simpler, more personal. She was happy, deeply, completely happy. "Mama! Mama!" Imogen set down her pen as her daughter, 18 months old with Hugh's dark hair and her own brown eyes, came toddling into the room, pursued by a laughing nursemaid. "Lady Catherine, you mustn't run from nurse," Imogen chided gently, scooping up the child who'd been named for her late grandmother. "Papa?" Catherine asked hopefully, her favourite word and favourite person. "Papa is meeting with the steward about the tenant cottages. He'll be back for lunch." Imogen kissed her daughter's chubby cheek, breathing in that sweet baby scent that never failed to make her heart swell. The nursemaid retrieved Catherine with apologies, and Imogen returned to her desk. But before she could resume writing, strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and Hugh's voice rumbled warm against her ear. "Writing to Beatrice about how you've tamed the fearsome Duke of Blackthorn." Imogen leaned back into her husband's embrace, still marvelling at how natural this had become. Hugh's affection, freely given and received, replacing the rigid propriety he'd maintained for so long. "Actually, I was telling her about the new hospital wing you've agreed to fund in the village. She'll be impressed despite herself." Hugh pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I only agreed because you presented a devastatingly logical argument, and because you've made me soft, concerned with tenant welfare and public health rather than profit margins. You were always concerned with those things. I merely gave you permission to act on it, without feeling guilty about being frivolous." Perhaps. Hugh moved to perch on the edge of her desk, his grey eyes no longer cold but warm with contentment, studying her face. Kit's letter arrived. He's in Cairo now, apparently having the time of his life, excavating something ancient and probably cursed. Is he planning to return for Christmas? He says yes, but Kit's promises about timing are notoriously flexible. He might arrive Christmas Eve or Easter Sunday. Both are equally likely. Hugh's smile was affectionate rather than frustrated. "I'm glad he's found his path, though. Adventure suits him far better than ducal responsibility ever would have." Imogen reached up to lace her fingers through Hugh's. "You miss him. I do. But I'm grateful too, for his understanding, his blessing, his friendship, and for his remarkably good sense in knowing when to step aside and let his brother have what he actually needed." "What did you need?" Imogen asked, though she knew the answer. Hugh pulled her up from the desk chair, wrapping both arms around her and holding her close. "This. You. A life that includes passion as well as duty, love as well as responsibility. Someone who sees past the Duke to the man beneath and loves him anyway, frowns and brooding and terrible social skills included. Your social skills have improved dramatically, only because you've taught me that conversation can be more than strategic maneuvering. That people can be interesting, even delightful." Hugh's hand came up to cup her cheek in that achingly familiar gesture. You've transformed everything, Imogen, made me remember how to live rather than merely fulfill obligations. Good, Imogen said, rising on her toes to kiss him softly, because you've transformed me too, made me believe I was worth choosing, worth loving, worth fighting for. They stood wrapped together in the drawing room, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, their daughter's laughter echoing from somewhere in the house. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, this life they'd built together from mutual recognition and growing love. Imogen, Hugh said eventually, his voice taking on that particular tone that meant he was about to say something he'd been thinking about for some time. Yes, I want to host a ball, here at Blackthorn Abbey. A proper, spectacular affair with hundreds of guests and excessive flowers and entirely too much champagne. Imogen pulled back to look at him in surprise. Hugh had spent their entire courtship avoiding social occasions whenever possible, only participating when absolutely necessary. You want to host a ball? I want to show you off, Hugh corrected, his smile turning slightly wicked. I want everyone who ever overlooked you, who dismissed you as a wallflower, to see you as Duchess of Blackthorn. Magnificent, confident, utterly beloved. I want to watch you shine and know that you're mine, and I'm the luckiest man in England. Tears pricked Imogen's eyes, the happy kind, the kind that came from being loved so thoroughly and completely. That's the second most romantic thing you've ever said to me. What's the first? Everything you said that night in the library when you told me you'd been watching me and fighting it, and wanting nothing more than to drag me away from Kit's attentions. Hugh laughed, the sound rich and warm. Then I shall have to work harder to top it. I have an entire lifetime to come up with increasingly romantic declarations. I look forward to each one. They kissed again, slow and deep and full of promise. 2 years married, and Imogen still felt that spark of electricity every time Hugh touched her. She suspected she always would. Outside the drawing room, the Duchess Georgiana paused in the hallway, listening to her son's laughter, genuine, unreserved, joyful. She smiled to herself, satisfied. Both her boys had found their paths, Kit to adventure and discovery, Hugh to love and purpose. It had all worked out exactly as she'd hoped. Though she'd never admit to anyone, especially not to Hugh or Kit, that she'd orchestrated quite a lot of it. Sometimes the best matchmaking looked like happy accident. Inside the drawing room, Hugh and Imogen remained wrapped in each other's arms, discussing plans for their ball for Christmas with Kit, for the future stretching bright and full of possibility before them. No regrets? Hugh asked softly. Imogen thought about the path that had brought them here, her seasons as a wallflower, Kit's charming courtship, Hugh's fierce pursuit, the choice she'd made in this very house 2 years ago. Not a single one, she said firmly. I chose the right brother. I chose love, intensity, partnership, challenge, everything that matters. I chose you, Hugh, and I'd choose you again, every single time. Good, Hugh murmured against her hair, because I chose you too. The moment I saw you, really saw you, I chose you. Even when I was fighting it, denying it, trying to be honorable, I'd already chosen you. You were always meant to be mine, just as I was always meant to be yours. Right, brother, then, Imogen teased, echoing that first confrontation that had changed everything. Hugh's arms tightened around her. Right, brother, he confirmed. Finally and forever, the right brother. And as afternoon sunshine filled the drawing room at Blackthorn Abbey, illuminating the Duke and Duchess wrapped in each other's arms, Imogen knew with bone-deep certainty that this love, this life, this man was worth every moment of uncertainty, every awkward season, every time she'd been overlooked or dismissed. Because being seen, truly seen by Hugh Montclair, being chosen by him, loved by him, was worth any price. She'd started the season as a wallflower, expecting nothing. She'd ended it as a duchess, beloved and happy, with a husband who looked at her as though she'd hung the moon and stars. Sometimes, Imogen thought, the most extraordinary love stories began with the simplest truth. She'd been flirting with the wrong brother all along. The end. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this unforgettable journey. We hope you felt every glance, every heartbeat, and every choice Lady Imogen made. If this story moved you, please consider liking, commenting, and sharing it with others who love emotional romantic tales as much as we do. We'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment? Did you also root for the wrong brother? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and support us from the bottom of your heart. Your support keeps us motivated to continue creating stories full of love, redemption, and powerful turning points. Another story is waiting for you at the end of the video. Click and be surprised by more emotional romantic tales just like this one. Thank you for being here. The Legends of Love team.